Kingdom Hearts is one of Square Enix's largest and most popular game franchises, spanning many games across multiple platforms. The series united fans of both Disney and Final Fantasy in a unique experience that continues to grow both in popularity and in the scope of its story. Today, I am going to go over my picks for top 10 Kingdom Hearts games released as of this recording. As Kingdom Hearts Melody of Memory is not out as of this recording, it will not be included. Additionally, any game with a final mix variant will be considered one title and is ranked based on its final mix version. Total remakes, such as ReChain of Memories, will be ranked separately since they are entirely different games. Now let's begin. Number 10. Kingdom Hearts 358 over 2 days. Kingdom Hearts 358 over 2 days, or as some people call it, 358 and a half days, released on the Nintendo DS. It was an earlier title in a string of games where the franchise would spread itself pretty thin across multiple platforms. Days gave you more backstory on Roxas and his experiences with Organization 13 as a whole leading up to the beginning of Kingdom Hearts 2. The game also allowed you to play as other Organization members, which was of course a neat concept, but many, including myself, wish it wasn't exclusive to this handheld title. The game also introduces you to a new character named Xion, who joins Organization 13 as its 14th member. And she is also not really a nobody, but that's a subject for another video. This game was fairly popular nonetheless due to the fact that, for once, you don't play as Sora. So it was an interesting change of pace. While it's far from the best the franchise has to offer, at least it's not coded. The game was not redone or even remastered for the HD remix, but was instead turned into a sort of cinematic cutscene movie, to give players the story info needed to understand the mayhem that would later follow in the series. Number 9. Kingdom Hearts ReChain of Memories. Many people are probably going to say that this game doesn't even deserve a spot, but it's still better than coded and recoded, so it's gonna get one. ReChain of Memories was the PS2 remake of the Game Boy Advance game Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories. It came with updated visuals and a far more expansive and comprehensive story. However, the card-based battle system doesn't translate well from the Game Boy to the PlayStation 2, as it's most people's major complaint when it comes to the game. It just doesn't work in a 3D environment, and a lot of people skip the game altogether. The story takes place between Kingdom Hearts and Kingdom Hearts 2, and runs adjacent to part of Kingdom Hearts 358 over 2 days. However, despite its flaws, I have found enjoyment in the game. As long as you understand enemy weaknesses, then most fights are pretty easy. The game also doesn't end with Sora's story. Riku is also a playable character in the game, and plays pretty differently from the former. The game was a great idea on paper, but this remake just doesn't click with most fans. Number 8. Kingdom Hearts 0.2 Birth by Sleep, a fragmentary passage. This one is kind of awkward to judge, as it's not really a full-length standalone game included in the 2.8 final chapter prologue. It served as more of a tech demo for Kingdom Hearts 3. Nevertheless, it does have its own story and title, so I decided to include it. I rank it low on the list due to its short length, as it only takes a few hours to complete the story. This title did offer insight into what Aqua was doing in the Realm of Darkness after Birth by Sleep, and its ending runs adjacent to the end of the first Kingdom Hearts, as made apparent by its final set of cutscenes. Aside from giving us a taste of the gameplay and graphics that Kingdom Hearts 3 would later bring to the table, it also filled in some lore and answered some questions we may have had since the first game, like, why doesn't Mickey have a shirt on? With its length being my only real critique of the game, it's earned a spot on the list. Number 7. Kingdom Hearts Union Cross, or Union X, Dark Road. You may not have expected to see this game on the list, but it's honestly not at all bad as far as mobile games go. This title has a longer history than many realize, and I'm not going to go into all that now. I included Dark Road as it's really just an extension of the main game rather than a separate title. Union Cross allows you to make your own Keyblade wielder back during the days where it seemed like everyone had a Keyblade. The story originally leads up to the Keyblade War that is mentioned in many other titles, but also goes beyond this and continues to add to the lore of the franchise. While its story contributions have been few so far in the series, I have a strong feeling it'll be far more relevant going forward. The game's combat deals with collecting medals of your favorite characters from Kingdom Hearts, Disney, and Final Fantasy, and using them for attacks based on that medal's type, strength, magic, and speed. I've personally loved the amount of lore it adds, and it's a great way to kill time. However, its biggest flaw is outside of its story. It isn't very beginner-friendly. Even if you pay to get a ton of great medals, if you don't understand the ins and outs of the game, you simply won't perform as well as the more experienced players. Being a top player requires you to understand how medals work, the best order for them, multipliers, and so on. If you don't care about all that and just want the story, then just throw your favorite and strongest medals in your equipment and have at it. This game also introduced the ability to upgrade your Keyblade and make it stronger, and even change how it looks. A concept that would later be used in Kingdom Hearts 3. Dark Road is the other side of this coin, and serves as a companion to Union Cross in a way. It dives much more into Xehanort, and I don't really wish to spoil as much since it's still kind of new at the time of this recording, so I'll let you judge it for yourself. Union Cross is the main thing we're talking about here. Union Cross got a cinematic cutscene movie treatment with back cover in the 2.8 Final Chapter Prologue release. This added more backstory to the mobile game, and I feel will be very important to the future of the series. Number 6. Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories. The original Chain of Memories released on the Game Boy Advance, and was the second title released in the franchise. It takes place after Kingdom Hearts 1, but before Kingdom Hearts 2, and before the ending of 358 over 2 days. This entry introduced us to characters like Naminé and the fan favorite Axel. Other Organization 13 members made an appearance in this title before anyone knew exactly who they were or what their purpose in the franchise was going to be. The card system works here far better than in the later PlayStation 2 remake of the game, and this is what gives it a higher slot, proving that better graphics doesn't always make a better game. Aside from visuals, this game is only lacking compared to the remake in one department: story. ReChain of Memories, while essentially the same story, provided just a little more context, as it came out after more plot for the franchise had been developed. Despite that, as a game versus its own remake, it undeniably wins, as its battle system is just better suited for a 2D game. Number 5. Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance. Kingdom Hearts 3D was, as you can maybe guess, released originally for the Nintendo 3DS. This game was early on confused by some to be the third official entry in the series, but this rumor was quickly dispelled. Once again, you play as Sora, and like ReChain of Memories, you play as Riku as well. Only this time, you can play both stories at roughly the same time, as you constantly switch back and forth between the two. This game would follow a similar combat system as the other handheld titles, but would introduce something new: flow motion. Flow motion was a unique system, allowing us to use the environment in battle and to traverse the worlds. You can grind rails, jump off walls, swing around light posts, and more. It made the combat fun and fresh, even if it did need a little bit of refining. We were also introduced to Dream Eaters, and honestly, this is where the game falls a bit flat for me. The Dream Eaters serve as your companions instead of Donald and Goofy. You can even switch them out, play with them, train them, etc. And while this may have been a cute gimmick on the 3DS, many people later realized that it doesn't add a whole lot to the plot. You could remove the friendly Dream Eaters altogether and all the extra care that came with them, you basically still have the same game. It wasn't all bad though. Some people genuinely like the Dream Eaters, and there's nothing wrong with that. Where this game excelled was the plot. After years of not really knowing where the franchise was going, we finally had a clue. Things were ramping up, as we started heading towards the release of Kingdom Hearts 3, which would still be a ways off at this time. Thanks to this game, we had an end goal to look towards. A final showdown with the 13 Xehanorts and 7 Guardians of Light. This led to years of speculation as to who exactly all 13 vessels were. The worlds were vibrant, the Dream Eaters, while a bit silly, were diverse, and the combat was unique, and it served as a segue into the end of the Xehanort saga. Number 4, Kingdom Hearts 3. This is where some people may disagree, but Kingdom Hearts 3 was a solid entry into the franchise and a nice way to top off this long saga. Needless to say, visually, the game was the best looking in the series. Combat went back to the MP/command menu system of the other numbered titles and was as fluent as ever. Kingdom Hearts 3 brought together parts of all of the best games. Reaction commands in battles, shot locks, upgradable keyblades. They even remember to throw a Dream Eater in there. The worlds this time around took a more modern approach with Disney titles such as Frozen, Big Hero 6, Tangled, and others, but still managed to hold on to that Disney charm that made many fall in love with the games. Kingdom Hearts 3 marked the end of the Xehanort saga, which spanned from the first game across all the spin-offs and handheld titles to now, and was surprisingly big in world scale. Many complaints come from its length, difficulty or lack thereof, lack of keyblade selection, and not enough post-game content, and a perceived notion that the story doesn't really kick in until the end of the game. Some of these are valid complaints. Regardless of your feelings of the game, it does tie off the Xehanort saga nicely and pumps us full of excitement for the next chapter in the story. The complaints I mentioned earlier are actually not what knocks it down on my list, but rather that it was an incomplete game at launch. The Remind DLC would later come and serve as the true ending to Kingdom Hearts 3. The DLC was $29.99 in USD and only added a bit of story content, some of which was just replaying the ending again, but with the chance to play as separate characters who honestly couldn't even match Sora's level. Additionally, it did add other things, most notably the new Data boss fights with Organization 13 and the final Yozora boss fight, whose ending cutscenes raised far more questions than they answered. The future of Kingdom Hearts looks to be even more confusing than before. Also, what was the purpose of the 100-acre wood in that game? I never hated that world, but just why? Number 3, Kingdom Hearts, the game that started it all, and the game that made many fans fall in love with this franchise, including myself. The first game was ambitious and unique. Disney had a track record of take it or leave it when it comes to video games. When this game was released, it promised to be a Disney game like no other, and it delivered on that promise. The inclusion of Final Fantasy characters was definitely an added bonus, but many people confuse it as a crossover game when it was never intended to be. Kingdom Hearts was always a Disney game before it was a Disney Final Fantasy crossover game. Even if you don't like to hear it, that's a topic for a different day. Kingdom Hearts saw you playing as a boy named Sora who would later lose his home to darkness and the creatures who reside in the realm of darkness called the Heartless. He would then be thrusted into an adventure where he would find companionship with Disney characters Donald Duck and Goofy in search of his friends Riku and Kairi. The inclusion of Final Fantasy characters added a much-needed edge to the game and brought in an entire fandom with them. The ability to fight Squall, Cloud Strife, Sephiroth, and others was a really satisfying inclusion. The hopping between Disney worlds was a blast, and honestly, the game's weakest feature was the gummy missions. Though that's not to say nobody liked them, as it's the first entry in the series, the combat is a little heavy compared to later games and maybe a little clunky comparatively. But the final mix release did remedy a lot of the combat issues, while also adding new story elements that would be used in later games. Square and this first entry captured that sense of childlike wonder that many Disney games failed to do previously. And Final Fantasy fans got to see some of their favorite characters from multiple titles meet and interact. The combination of Final Fantasy characters and concepts, detailed Disney worlds, unique weapons and enemies, and a grand story that would spawn one of Square's biggest franchises puts this game high on the list. Number 2. Kingdom Hearts: Birth by Sleep. Birth by Sleep was first released for the Sony PlayStation Portable. This was the first time the lore would be blown wide open by a story that wasn't led by Sora or someone directly linked to Sora like Roxas. Birth by Sleep had a combat system that was similar to most of the handheld titles that came before or after. However, the story is where this game truly shines. This time you had 3 characters to play as: Terra, Aqua, and Ventus. You could play their respective stories in any order, but there was an intended order. This would be the game to introduce many new plot devices that would later be used in the series leading up through Kingdom Hearts 3, including the Keyblade War, the concept of Keyblade Masters and the Mark of Mastery exam, a form of ritual for passing ownership of a Keyblade to someone else, the X-Blade or Keyblade, or some people say Kai Blade, and of course the main antagonist of the series up to Kingdom Hearts 3, Master Xehanort. The plot for each character, if played in order, is structured very well, as the first intended playthrough with Terra gives you very little information about the plot. Terra spends the least amount of time in each world and is really just pushing straight through. Ventus gives you more time with the characters in each world and then starts to widen the narrative a bit, and Aqua closes the deal by wrapping up missing details as well as having an additional episode if you meet the requirements. Along with Master Xehanort, we would meet another interesting villain, Vanitas, whose origins is its own topic and can be a bit confusing for newcomers. In addition to all of these new characters and concepts being introduced, this would be the earliest game in the timeline with the exception of the mobile game Union Cross/Dark Road, as it takes place 10 years before the first game. However, it is still recommended that you play the games in release order for your first playthrough, as that is how the story is intended to be told. This game, as expansive and beneficial to the franchise and lore as it is not without its weaknesses. The worlds can sometimes feel uninhabited and dead, much like the first game. But the difference here is there are more areas that feel like they should be inhabited, but they just aren't. Whereas in the first game, you spend most of your time in forests, jungles, deserts, abandoned castles, etc. Birth by Sleep, on the other hand, has towns with very little people, save for Disney Town itself. Spaceships with basically no crew, a royal ball with only a few people actually attending. Most, if not all of these flaws, are forgiven considering the hardware limitations of the PSP. Birth by Sleep was truly an interesting addition and helped move the franchise forward more than any other non-numbered title, and arguably even more so than Kingdom Hearts and Kingdom Hearts 2 themselves. Number 1. Kingdom Hearts 2. It should be no surprise to anyone that Kingdom Hearts 2 is at the top of this list. It is heralded by many fans as the absolute best the franchise has to offer. Everything the first game got right, this game did even better. Kingdom Hearts 2 also corrected some of Kingdom Hearts' weaknesses as well. What was heavy and sometimes clunky combat became incredibly fluid and had a larger emphasis on aerial fighting. Triangle reaction commands made battles far more cinematic and unique. Reaction commands also allowed easier use of special abilities and attacks, including team-up moves with all of the various allies in the game. Drive forms were introduced exclusively in this game and would allow our hero to dual-wield Keyblades in 3 out of the 4 forms. An additional form was added into the final mix version of the game, known as Limit Form, which allowed you to play much more similarly to the first game, with familiar attacks and abilities. The Gummy missions got a much needed upgrade in this game. Though definitely not the highlight of the game, they were far more diverse and enjoyable than in the first game. In-game and post-game content was the most plentiful here than in any other title. You could go fight in tournaments, unlock Final Form, do data battles with past Organization 13 members, finish the 100 Acre Wood and Atlantica if you hadn't already, farm the Ultima Weapon, fight Sephiroth and in the final mix version, the Lingering Will, unlock the rest of the Keyblades, and much more. Kingdom Hearts 2 had far more meat on its bones than any other Kingdom Hearts game to date. On the story side of things, while this isn't the first time we saw nobodies as there were organization members in Chain of Memories, it would be the first time they were common enemies like Heartless. And in fact, they would be the main in-game enemies for Sora, Donald, Goofy, and others to deal with. Final Fantasy characters also saw a larger role in this game than previously, as they helped fight during the Heartless War on Hollow Bastion. And you could, for the first time, even add one as a main party member with Final Fantasy X's Auron. As great as this game was and is, it's definitely not without flaws. People complain Kingdom Hearts 3's story doesn't pick up till halfway through or the end. Kingdom Hearts 2 has a similar problem, and people just choose to ignore it. Sora and crew seem to be aimlessly jumping from world to world without much cause or reason to believe most of these worlds would have anything to do with their quest. Kingdom Hearts 3, at the very least, had an organization member appear in each world with a clear mission in mind. In Kingdom Hearts 2, it just feels like Sora loves getting into other people's business. Also, much like Kingdom Hearts 3, Kingdom Hearts 2 had, in the past, been criticized for being too easy, with a common joke being if you walk in a straight line and press triangle, you win. The final mix and HD remix versions of the game seem to have adjusted the difficulty a bit, which may nullify this argument, but it's still the second easiest Kingdom Hearts game to beat in terms of the main story. Nevertheless, Kingdom Hearts 2 is undeniably the most robust, most popular, and arguably most influential game in the franchise, which is why it gets the #1 slot. And there you have it, my personal list for the top 10 Kingdom Hearts games, at least up to this point. As mentioned earlier, Melody of Memory's not out yet, so maybe we'll have to do an updated version in the future when perhaps another numbered entry is released into the franchise. If you enjoyed this video, like, favorite it, subscribe, always subscribe, and be looking out for the next one, and let me know what you may like to see next. You know, I enjoy these top 10s. I'm trying to get back involved, so, you know, let me know what you would like to see, and we'll see if we can make it happen.